Hey there, I'm Dan. You're watching the Salty Sea, and we've got a bit of a doozy with this one. Strap yourselves in. I am going to get into the nuts and bolts of all of the narrative enhancements, bonuses, all of the stuff that you can get in Warcry 2.0 in the Heart of Gur. Now, narrative play, of course, always approach it casually, please don't take this as sort of min-maxing. The idea here is to create things that'll give you kind of wild stories, or tailor whatever power level min-maxing you do with items, tailor it to your play groups, make sure that you're creating fun games. But just be aware, there's some crazy stuff that you can do in the narrative side of this book, and I'm going to go through all of it today. So first, I just want to do some general guidelines for how to use these bonuses as far as it occurs to me, right? So one is just to mitigate a weakness. A lot of heroes have just one Achilles heel that kind of stops them from being the dominant force in games that you really want them to be. Things like adding some durability for a glass cannon hero, right? Something like a Mizzen Master. Adding move to something like an Annihilator Prime, where it's only got move 3 and it doesn't have any bonus move abilities. Annihilator Primes do incredible damage, but they just have a tough time getting to where they need to go. You can also use them to enhance a strength. Some heroes are really good at just one thing, and if you make them even better at it, it goes from making them solid to just like a completely overwhelming force. Something like a +1 attack on a mega boss, for example, just pushes the damage through the roof. Something like anti-crit stuff on a toughness 5 hero, right? So all of a sudden their durability is just incredible. The other thing can be to create a combo. You can also find 2 items that maybe each one isn't the best for your leader, but they increase each other's usefulness geometrically, and that can be really huge. Something like that. The one thing I would generally avoid is boosting a kind of medium or unused stat, which I think will come pretty naturally to most people to avoid kind of doing that, but just a general guideline. So let's start by first just talking about the quest types, right? Because I think one of the first things you should think about when you're thinking about kind of what kinds of crazy combos, what kinds of additions to your lists you want to do, should be kind of how easy it is to achieve those, and what you're getting per quest. So the first kind of quest is command trait quests. These are just, you need to take down an enemy hero. You can do it at range or in melee. You can do it with an ability. You can do it a ton of different ways, but it is tough because you don't gain progress to it like slowly over the course of battles. It's just one thing you achieve. So it could take 1 battle, it could take 6 battles. The cool thing is your leader can stack up to 3 of these command trait quests. So once you get a couple items on your leader, you could potentially be stacking these up pretty quickly. So I would generally say to wait for your multiple traits until you have an artifact, because that'll be the point where it's just much easier to get takedowns, and you'll have just a little bit more power with your hero. Artifact quests are the next one, and they can be a little bit different. So the Grand Alliance ones all share criteria. You get bonuses for being the attacker, so there's a fun give and take because the attacker is usually at a slight disadvantage in every mission. Though you should know, not every mission has an attacker and defender. I think it's, only 2/3, 1/3, I think, or maybe it's more like 50-50. So this can take anywhere from 3 to 5 battles to complete. So, it'll be a bit of a wait, but it's there's just a lot of really powerful Grand Alliance specific artifacts. Now there's also a universal artifact quest. That one only takes about 1 or 2 battles to complete. So that's perfect if you just want to do your cool stuff really, really quickly. Just doing that universal artifact quest right away can be great, and then maybe you get another hero down the road, and then you give that hero one of your Grand Alliance artifacts. The last one is encampment quests, and these are a little more complicated. Now, I have mixed feelings on them because, so for one, I've got one of the Grand Alliance encampments here in front of me. All the Grand Alliance encampments are really, really good. They give you an extra 150 points to work with in your warband, which is great. And they're kind of all about accumulating value. you can basically, at the end of each aftermath sequence, you get to roll and you get just way more sort of lesser items, and the lesser items are much more powerful than they would be, or at least the best ones aren't more powerful than the other ones, but it's much, let's say it's much easier to get a powerful lesser artifact this way, and then you're getting double because you still have the normal aftermath sequence, so you just get so much extra stuff and bling for all of your lower down the road fighters. This is especially good for any warband that has a leader who is not really the main point of the warband. In general, narrative is sort of much more focused towards warbands where the leader is really legendary. So it's nice to see that you can get encampments that really boost up the rest of your warband and don't really require your leader to be your focal point. Now the one negative about the sort of Grand Alliance encampments is they are some of the best encampments, but you can kind of stumble into and accidentally get some reasonably good encampments that aren't quite this good but are still solid. You can kind of stumble into that lots of different ways in your aftermath sequence of different quests. So I wouldn't personally go for one of these Grand Alliance encampment quests unless I was like absolutely sure I needed an encampment yesterday. Otherwise, you know, you have a lot of other cool options out there for encampments. The other way, I guess, would be if I was specifically in the type of warband I talked about before, where your main focus is not on your leader. So let's get into these universal traits. Here you see exactly how to get one of them. So, you know, you can do a takedown or an ability. So that's really solid for getting these command traits. Every single universal command trait has some real applications, and I love that. Well, maybe Hardy Constitution doesn't. D3 damage points of healing is not that special, although, well, you'll see much better healing items later on. Ferocious Combatant is just kind of generically good. If you don't know what to use, you should probably add Ferocious Combatant. Agile Warrior is amazing on any move 3 hero that doesn't have a bonus move, and probably pretty reasonable on move 4 heroes that don't have a bonus move as well. Resourceful is great for dice-hungry warbands. I'm using that in my warband at the moment, in my narrative warband. Just really solid anytime you just are desperate for abilities and that you can't get enough of them. Resourceful is really useful to have. Thick-skinned is an incredible amount of damage reduction. Each time an attack action scores any crits on this fighter, one of those crits becomes a hit instead. This isn't once per battle. This is every single time you get attacked. So on a toughness 5 hero, especially toughness 5 heroes with very few wounds, like a Dark Oath War Queen, I think is a good example of that. Those can be really tough, but they tend to kind of disappear quickly just because they have a low wound pool. Thick-skinned just absolutely keeps them in the fight because, you know, the one way to take out toughness 5 fighters for most fighters is to get those crits. And when you're crits, when you have to multi-crit to really chunk down one of those fighters, they become incredibly durable. But this is also good on sort of more glass cannon things. You know, you're going to get 12 to 15 wounds over the course of a game out of this. Pretty amazing damage reduction there. Any kind of leader where you just really are desperate to see them stay alive, I would absolutely go for a universal trait, thick-skinned. Even as kind of one of my later traits too. Once I've, you know, I'm sure I can get kills, but now, like, my opponent's leaders are also getting really scary. You know, thick-skinned makes an incredible second trait as well. Skilled Commander, another one of these ones that's just really good for warbands where the highest impact fighters are not leaders. Horns of Hashut I'll talk about this later in Rotten Ruin, they have a very interesting twist on Skilled Commander. But this is just a solid one, again, for those warbands that have kind of multiple fighters at very even strength to the leader. Now let's talk about the universal artifacts. These ones, nice because they just take half the time of the Grand Alliance artifacts to get, so you can play with your toys a little bit quicker with them. Now, not all of these are very good. Some of the highlights, for me at least, are Cursed Blade, +1 damage from hit and crit. It's an excellent combo with Ferocious Combatant. Now, it suffers from being just a worse version of an item that Destruction and Order have access to, but you could say that that's a benefit too. Like, if you want the same kind of geometric sort of combo there because, Ferocious Combatant is more attacks. Cursed Blade is more damage for each attack. So each of those items makes the other item add more, essentially, than it would normally. So you could do this as just sort of, if you wanted to do that kind of setup, you could use Cursed Blade as sort of a more casual, a more sort of opponent-friendly version of the same setup. Or it lets you do something similar in Death or Chaos that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise. Amethyst Amulet is just really incredible. I think it might be the third best item in the game. I'm not sure. Basically, once per battle, you get a bonus action. Pick a point within 6 inches of the bearer that's on the battlefield floor or a platform. Remove the bearer from the battlefield and set them up once more with the center of the base on that point. First amazing thing about Amethyst Amulet, it is a move that does not count as a move, so netters can't stop you, right? So if your opponent has lots of netters, just you hold the Amethyst Amulet until you've been netted, and then you get to blink 6 inches somewhere. Incredible utility there. Netters are probably the scariest thing in the game for really, really impactful, scary leaders. They're all just terrified of getting caught in nets, and Amethyst Amulet just sort of, it removes the fear of nets, right? Because the first successful net they get on you, you just blink out, maybe you just go kill the netter, and now, they've lost a lot of utility there. The other amazing thing that Amethyst Amulet does, big mounted units, those are some of the toughest fighters in the game. However, the big drawback, right, they can't use terrain. They're really easy to hide from in hunter missions. It's just really easy to dance around them if you have a mobile warband against a big mounted warband. Amethyst Amulet, you just blink right up onto the terrain, and then all of a sudden, no one can hide from you. So it's really incredible on mounted heroes, just getting that extra blink, getting into position, just amazing. And then for any other hero, it's just a solid bonus move. Unless your hero is like a 10-inch move flyer, where it's just better to be getting a bonus move than it is to just blink 6 inches. Amethyst Amulet is just way better than a bonus move action for any kind of foot slogging hero. So it gives your high impact foot heroes that, their big drawback is that they don't really move around the board very quickly. That 6-inch blink, being able to just go past terrain with it, is really incredible. Now, Serpent Tongue Scepter is another really interesting one. It's just a burn spell, right? And I would say on most heroes it's not that interesting, but how about I read it out first? Once per battle, you get a bonus action. If you do it, you pick one visible enemy fighter within 9 inches of the bearer. They have to be on the floor. They can't be on terrain. Allocate 2d6 damage to them. Then allocate d3 damage to every other fighter within 3 inches of that fighter. So it's amazing on objectives. It's amazing if you sort of are within range of another battle group right away. If you get initiative, you can just decimate that battle group a little bit with the Serpent Tongue Scepter. I would say those are really the two uses for it. But if a lot of your opponents are on big swarm warbands, that can be really solid. It can be solid on kind of a ranged fighter who's not going to be using some of these big melee buffs anyway, right? So you have a lot of options here. I certainly wouldn't call it one of the best items in the game, but it's just really interesting utility that I think a lot of warbands can get use from. Now we're going to go into the Grand Alliances, and really interesting to see some of the themes here with the Grand Alliances, and Chaos I think is the best example of that. So you're going to right away see this theme around kill triggers, and that's going to be true of the traits as well, but Blade of the Tallyman and Eight-Horned Helms are both pretty reasonable. The Eight-Horned Helm gives you a bonus move or bonus attack every time you get a kill. That can be really powerful. Blade of the Tallyman can be really interesting too for a fighter who uses abilities to get kills. You can basically keep recharging and just keep it flowing and coming. Basically every time you get a takedown, you get 1 additional wild dice for your next round. Both of those are really solid, really interesting, but you do have to be sure that you are building around them correctly. You need a leader who doesn't have any issue getting kills, because otherwise, if you're just having a difficult time triggering them, you get nothing out of these, right? So just know they're very powerful, but they're a little bit Johnny-like. You have to be smart about how you build your warband. There's also the Writhing Torch. or Torque. I don't know how it's supposed to be pronounced, but it's a cool ability boost. Add 3 to the values of abilities used by the bearer. Maximum of 6, unfortunately. Games Workshop won't let us live with this one. But in theory, it combos pretty well with Resourceful, right? Get lots of triggers. In practice, there's not a ton of leaders in Chaos that really benefit from it. And it's the same complaint a lot of people have leveled at Tzeentch's ability suite, where they have that really incredible double that boosts the ability value on your sort of on another fighter's next ability. But then there's just no places where you can use it effectively. So, you know, Skaven use the Writhing Torch pretty well, Varengard use it pretty well, Witherlords use it pretty well, but otherwise, that's kind of it. There's really just not... I'm sure there's a few others I didn't name there, but there's not a ton of Chaos factions that can actually benefit from this, but the ones that do, you know, it can be a really big boost. The Flux Stave of Ocladius, just a bonus move. It's almost always going to be worse than Amethyst Amulet. I just wanted to mention it here because 8 to 10 inch flyers do use the Flux Stave better than Amethyst Amulet unless you're worried about nets. Man, even on a 10-inch flyer, I might still use the Amethyst Amulet just because you get it earlier in your campaign and it beats nets. Tough to say, really tough to say there which one I would want to use more. But either way, you know, getting a free move on a 10-inch flyer is really powerful. And then, you know, anytime you're getting free actions, that can translate to more utility and more damage against your opponent. So the Flux Stave is really solid. You know, and especially if you have a warband with 2 heroes, or if your plan is to have 2 heroes, being able to put Amethyst Amulet on one of them and then Flux Stave on the other can get you just a ton of mobility in a warband that might otherwise struggle for it. So that can be really solid. Just a good one to think about, even if, you know, you might use the amulet instead. Now the traits. This is where we're really seeing our one big theme really come through with Chaos, right? So one is you get more bonus actions here. So you can kind of build your own rampage just out of Chaos traits using Merciless Killer, Eternal Bloodlust, which gives you 1 bonus move action, but you have to finish within 1 inch of an enemy fighter. Again, you know, Merciless Killer kind of combines with Flux Stave to kind of build your own rampage, which is kind of nice there. It's definitely a something you can do, and something that's good on any combat hero, right? It's like, it's a little combo that you know, it doesn't really matter who you're getting it for. It's always going to be good. There's more kill trigger stuff here, right? And you can stack both of them if you want, which is kind of nice, right? Because you can have up to 3 heroic traits. It's not like Blade of the Tallyman and 8 Horned Helm. You don't have to pick. So you can go, you know, Master of Dark Rituals and Strength and Slaughter, right? So you get the heals, you get more wild dice from the Master ability. This is all very reasonable. It's all pushing you towards getting kill trigger pinball, essentially, on your Chaos heroes. They're just like really pushing this idea with 2 traits and 2 of the abilities, or sorry, 2 of the artifacts being this. That's a full third of the traits that are just essentially get bonuses when you kill stuff. And then a lot of this stuff is also kind of helping you get kills, right? Merciless Killer obviously combines well with the kill trigger things. It makes you more likely to get the kills. Unfortunately, Sharpened Teeth, which really good item. It doesn't actually combine with the kill trigger things, right? Because it doesn't give you the attack action. It also doesn't give you a bonus heroic trait. If you take someone down with the Sharpened Teeth trigger, you don't get the heroic trait from it because it's not either an attack or an ability. However, it is really good. So what Sharpened Teeth does, every time you make a melee attack action, if you don't take down the fighter, allocate D3 damage points to that enemy fighter. That is going to be, especially for a chaff clearing hero, that is going to be more effective in a lot of the time than just adding 1 attack, because it always hits, right? So it just makes your attack output a lot smoother, which is what you want really for clearing chaff, is you want a much more reliable output that you know is going to count to 8 every time, or count to 10 every time. So I would say This is really good for a second hero where you're not going to be building a ton of sort of combo-tastic stuff because you know you only get one trait and one artifact with that hero. Well, if you just make the trait be sharpened teeth, that's amazing because you can just make sure that that hero is having a really reliable damage output. You're always getting either a kill or you're getting this extra D3 damage. Never going to be a miss, right? And so, yeah, just great for an ally whose job is to clear out chaff models. Overall, I would say Chaos has the weakest selection of enhancements. I mean, I guess if you play Kill Trigger Pinball, that's really, really powerful. And so maybe it's not the weakest because you have this one massive kind of build path that they're kind of slapping you across the face and telling you have to do. And that build path is very powerful, especially once you get to the end of it. 2 kill triggers, and then Merciless Killer, and then Ferocious Combatant. You're going to be making sure that you get kills and then getting bonuses out of them. Really powerful, but it's like just one build they're telling you have to do. And then outside of that, you're missing a lot, right? You kind of have to scrabble for it. So I wanted to do Chaos first just because I think it might be the weakest group. Next is going to be Death. Death, I think, is sort of a little bit more versatile than Chaos and kind of interesting. So let's get into it. So the first thing that jumps out to me with the Death artifacts is there's a couple really meta-dependent ones like Ring of Shadows and Blade of the Withered Rose, where I don't think I would use them unless specifically my opponent had a sort of warband where I really needed it. Especially Ring of Shadows being 12 inches of protection from range. It's still really easy for shooters to get within 12 inches. Same with Blade of the Withered Rose, where you can get -1 from their toughness. It's really only going to be valuable if you know that you're going to be in prolonged combats with, huge monstrous enemies. So potentially worthwhile, but it's really going to depend on your meta, and most people aren't going to find a ton from it. Other than that, there's a real durability sub-theme with all of the Death artifacts. You have Thirsting Blade, Gravesand Phylactery, Spectral Shield. All of these are just about making your fighter sort of harder to kill and winning the durability war, or letting you just stay on the battlefield using more of your good abilities, something like that. So the first is Thirsting Blade. Now this one I actually think is really good. So each time an enemy fighter is allocated damage points from a melee attack action made by the bearer, you can remove a number of damage points from the bearer equal to half the number allocated to that enemy fighter, rounding up. I think it's the best heal in the book when you think about certain fighters that are throwing around, 8 to 10 damage per attack. Getting 4 or 5 heals from it every time. That's more than double the other heals, which are, D3 after every activation. And yes, it's only on attacks instead of moves and attacks. But when you're attacking, hey, that's when you need the heals, right? Because you're in combat. So I would say it's significantly more valuable than those D3 abilities. And just, the same way that lifelink is often underestimated in Magic the Gathering, healing we underestimate it in Warcry because all the healing abilities are bad. But when you actually have a good one, it's actually very, very powerful. Gravesand Phylactery, it's a fine replacement for Thick-Skinned. If you decided when you started that you didn't want Thick-Skinned, you wanted something else, or if you've got Thick-Skinned for some reason and you've got this one. Actually, I think they non-bow with each other now that I'm reading them. But if you took something else instead of Thick-Skinned, there's nothing wrong with taking Gravesand Phylactery. One thing that's nice about it is Thick-Skinned, if you get multi-crit in one of the first attack actions that they do on you, you only remove one of them, right? Whereas Gravesand does all of them up until a certain point, so all of your damage reduction is coming up early. So that can be really powerful. So I think it's a very reasonable replacement if you want to have something a little fluffier than Thick-Skinned. And like I said, Thick-Skinned is one of the best universal traits. So very solid, but again, just focused on durability. Then you have Spectral Shield, just +2 toughness. This is fine for a toughness 3 fighter, but if I was worried about giving myself durability, I would probably go with Thirsting Blade or Gravesand before I would touch Spectral Shield. The other one, though, and again, we're going from durability to attrition wars, so it's still the same theme of death just being really hard to take off the table with these artifacts. You get the Macabre Grimoire. You get to resurrect an additional Graveguard every battle, something like that. Now, basically, you pick one friendly fighter that's been taken down, you roll 4 dice. If the combined score exceeds the wounds characteristic, you can set that fighter up within 5 inches of the bearer with no damage points on them. So, 4 dice, the average roll is going to be about 13. So, I wouldn't personally try to gamble on like trying to resurrect a 15 wound fighter or even a 12 wound fighter, but a 10 wound fighter, your chances are really high of success there. That's even more true of an 8 wound fighter, so getting extra ghouls, something like that. Your chances are just really, really high of success. And this is something that for Ossiarch Bone Reapers or Flesh Eater Courts, we're noticing more and more that the Night Haunt and the Soulblight Gravelord's resurrection abilities are some of the best triples in the game. And OBR and Flesh Eater Courts don't have that. They have to bring in an ally to get that. This way, especially in narrative where it's much harder to get allies, you have to do quests to get them. Being able to resurrect a Mortek or a Ghoul just really easily and quickly with your leader is absolutely valuable. Especially, I know it's only a 50-point fighter, but still it's when you need it and where you need it, because you get to put them 5 inches away, right? A big part of the utility around the Soulblight or the Night Haunt resurrections is taking someone who went down in one side of the battle and just putting them in a completely different side of the battle where maybe they're more useful. So this is a really solid ability and can be kind of used really well by certain leaders. Now we get to some of the traits, and I think the traits are a little bit better than the artifacts, but kind of similar themes, right? So the first is Grave Stench, which is subtracting 1 from the attack's characteristic of melee attack actions that target this fighter. This is incredible with Thick-Skinned, because Thick-Skinned is going to reduce incoming crits. The one time that people can really like overwhelm Thick-Skinned is there's when they have really high strength and they get a ton of regular hits, or when they get a multi-crit attack. And Grave Stench just really kneecaps both of those strategies, right? It's really hard to do weight of dice when Grave Stench is taking away your dice. It's really hard to get multiple crits when Grave Stench is making it so you have fewer fishing chances to get those crits. So these two kind of combine geometrically so that each one is making the other one more effective at doing its job, to the point where a hero with Grave Stench and Thick-Skinned together is just going to be an absolute nightmare to take off of the battlefield. So do this on any hero where you really, really need them to stay alive the whole round. Putting both of these traits on that hero is going to be pretty amazing. Now the one thing that's tough there is Grave Stench, the only way to get it is to take down an enemy hero, and this is a durability combo. So it can be kind of tough to set this up, right? If you're taking Thick-Skinned, you're usually not then trying to set up stacking a ton of traits on that hero, but it's certainly possible. And if you do manage to do it, like if you just have a really offensive fighter where you are then giving them durability on top of it, that can be just really a really massive combo there. Another one is Terrifying Visage. I don't know if this is the best trait in the game, but it's probably pretty close. It's definitely in the top group. Easily, absolutely. So the amazing thing that it does, once per battle, you use this as an action. Pick a visible enemy fighter within 6 inches of this fighter and roll a dice on a 2-up. They cannot activate this battle round. So the amazing thing about that, one, nets stop moves and disengages, but they still get to use an ability. They still get to try to shoot at you. They still, if they have Amethyst Amulet, can basically ignore the net. Terrifying Visage just gets rid of all of that. The other is that it works on a 2-up. So the only time it fails is on a 1, right? Most net abilities work on a 3-up, which failing 1 in 3 times, it's twice as much as failing 1 in 6 times, right? So I would be willing to kind of rely on this, and just the 1 out of 6 games where it doesn't pop off, I just, write that one off as as free samples. But otherwise, Terrifying Visage is just like just absolute lockdown, and once per battle you don't have to use dice, right? This is something that when it was on a triple was just considered like completely overwhelmingly too good. And so to have that as just a free once per battle action is incredibly powerful. Obviously, it's amazing with range 2, right? Anytime that you can lock someone down and then you're hitting them with no reprisal, that is incredibly powerful. It's a great answer for some of the really powerful sort of other combos that you'll see in other warbands. Cannot say enough about how good Terrifying Visage is and just how powerful you're going to find it anytime that you really want to be disrupting your opponents, which is going to be a lot in narrative play, right? Remember, people are stacking all these artifacts and items onto their heroes. Their heroes are incredibly powerful. Terrifying Visage just makes it so that, you know, if I'm winning the game around initiative, right? Like if you go resourceful plus Terrifying Visage, so you know you're going to win initiative when you need it, and you know you're going to lock down your opponent's hero when you need to lock them down. That is just like incredible disruption and control play available to any death player, which is pretty cool. Again, it is tough because this is a trait, so getting the trait can be difficult. You need to put it on a hero who can actually get some kills, but I'll talk about that later when we get to the combo section. Another one is Inescapable. This is just a bonus move action, just like the Chaos one. I just wanted to mention it. Amethyst Amulet, I think usually going to be better than this, but one, you could have both of them. Two, you know, on any of the big FEC flyers, you might value that extra 10-inch movement more than a 6-inch move teleport. Now let's get into Destruction, and this is where things get really silly. They have absolutely the best artifact in the game. I will show you the Math Hammer as soon as we get to the combos section, but Gristle Grinder is just the most absurd damage output possible. It combos with Ferocious Combatant in just a ridiculous way, right? Ferocious Combatant being +1 attack, Gristle Grinder being +1,000,000 damage per attack. Obviously, those combo to give each other more impact than they would otherwise have. It's just absurd. Only use this in highly competitive playgroups. If your opponents are playing competitive warbands in narrative, which, you know, some playgroups like to do. Some playgroups like to have sort of the highest level of play in their casual narrative groups. If that's happening, absolutely Gristle Grinder is reasonable. If you're bringing like a really weak warband and some of your opponents brought like really powerful stuff, then I think Gristle Grinder is reasonable. But otherwise, try to avoid this one. It is just not a friendly artifact. It is absurdly powerful. The difference between Gristle Grinder and what I think is the third most powerful artifact, which is Amethyst Amulet, the difference is just so huge and makes it kind of uncomfortable. Luckily, Destruction has other options for more casual play. Dynasty Shiv, where every time you attack, you just have a 1 in 3 chance of freezing them, I think is really solid, especially on any 2-inch range fighter, especially any 2-inch range fighter with sort of bonus moves, which we've seen some traits around where you can get more to your move anytime you can come in and do two attacks. It of course makes Rampage absurd. If you come into a group where you're 2 inches away from multiple fighters, you just hit one. If you manage to freeze it, you just move on to the next one, something like that. It's really cool little control piece, but because it'll only hit 1 out of every 3 times, you're gonna hit during the game, which is great, but it's not gonna be just like completely oppressive to your opponent. I think it's really sweet as like a very tricksy little control destruction thing, which I think it's great because Destruction doesn't always get a lot of opportunities to be really controlling, even though they now have 2 supposedly clever factions with Gloomspite Gits and Cruel Boys. I think it's really telling that in AOS, the 2 clever Destruction factions are 2 of the absolute worst factions in the entire game, because Games Workshop just doesn't know what to do with the big dumb smashy Grand Alliance having 2 clever tricksy factions in it. They don't know, they haven't figured out what sort of vibe of clever and tricksy works with the big dumb smashy options. And I think Dynasty Shiv is like one of the first really interesting attempts to do that, right? Of what it looks like to have control in the big dumb smashy warband. So I'm really curious if you end up using this in your narrative. Let me know. I'm really interested to see how it works out for people. Scuttle Mask is another one. You don't count the vertical distance moved when a bear is climbing, so this is really good for anyone who's got a good amount of move to them, but they don't have flying. Remember though that mounts can't climb at all, so you don't actually get the bonus from Scuttle Mask if you're using this on a mounted fighter, which is too bad. So if you've got a mounted fighter, stick with Amethyst Amulet. But Scuttle Mask is still really solid for certain people, and I think is useful in casual play. In fact, I would really say that here everything except the Leering Shield is pretty reasonable. The Leering Shield, of course, I don't think is very good. Adding 1 toughness, not nearly as good as adding 2 in the death thing. And then the no disengages while within 1. I don't think that's very valuable because chances are because you don't have big bonuses from this, chances are they're not worried about disengaging from you. They'll just attack you anyway, right? Otherwise, you get other cool stuff. You get Blood Champa, so you can do the kill trigger pinball thing that Chaos is doing. You can still do that with Destruction just as well as Chaos does it. So Destruction has a lot of great options here. For traits, Destruction just has more crazy stuff. Belligerent Brute is just really solid, just 1 big bonus attack. That's always going to be good. Unstoppable Rampager tells you what the combo is right on the tin, right? It's a absolute massive damage boost, especially when you're using Rampage, because Rampage is like move and then 3 attacks. All 3 of those attacks have +2. Just an amazing trait that's absolutely ridiculous, and you're going to be putting it on offensive fighters anyway. Those are the types of fighters that are good at stacking up traits, so this is going to be one of the easier ones to go get just because of who it works on, which is interesting. So Unstoppable Rampage are absolutely amazing. Dead Sneaky, I don't think it's very good, but I really think it's notable because it's the only buff I could find in the whole book for ranged fighters. I think they were wanting to be really careful with ranged to see. I know there were a lot of complaints about it from casual players in 1.0. They've kind of kneecapped it twice now, once in the Tome of Champions, even more so in Heart of Gur. This is the only buff you can get for ranged fighters, and I'm sure that they're just kind of starting this. I'm sure eventually they'll have faction-specific more faction-specific traits and artifacts available to people in their narrative campaigns, and maybe they'll experiment a little bit more with sort of more focused ranged buffs. This one is pretty weak, but hey, it exists, so that's cool. Otherwise, I would mostly avoid these traits, but they're, it's just really solid. And then Notorious Bully is pretty funny. Critting on 5s is really good. The fact that it only works against enemy heroes is really funny. But, really cool if you want that fluffy, like, big smash up between the leaders kind of play style, and especially that's really fluffy for Destruction and really funny for your opponents are going to want to avoid your leader if this is, so it'll create this kind of dynamic of chasing them down everywhere across the board, which is pretty cool. Alright, so let's get to the Order artifacts. Again, they have the best artifact in the game. Stormbringer is a clone of Gristlegrinder. They do the exact same thing. It makes a really odd dynamic, the fact that this is in 2 Grand Alliances, but not in the other 2. There's sort of a have and have-nots. If you have a big narrative league and some people are starting to take these, it's just going to be a really weird... as soon as one person takes Gristlegrinder or Stormbringer, then other people are going to feel like they have to take it, which is going to make a really odd dynamic in a big narrative league. Otherwise, again, I've said Stormbringer is very reasonable if you're playing an otherwise terrible warband. If you're playing something really low tier, it's reasonable to kind of get you up to a special place if your opponents are kind of playing more competitive stuff. But otherwise, I would just really avoid it. It's going to make for incredibly unfun games. I'll show you the Math Hammer later. I promise I'll show it. But just, your games are going to be awful. If one player has Stormbringer or Gristlegrinder and the other player does not, your games are not going to be fun. I just guarantee it. However, just like Destruction, Order has some really cool options here if you're not taking Stormbringer. Gromreel Plate is really good. -1 damage and -1 crit is really powerful. Combos with Thick Skinned, of course, right? Turning crits into regular, and then you're doing one less damage on the regular, right? If they're like a 2/5 hero, and then their first crit that would have done 5 is now doing actually 1 because you've got both Gromrill Plate and Thick Skinned, that's just they've got no damage at all, right? So just incredible durability there. And this is an artifact, right? So it's not as hard to stack onto Thick Skinned as some of the other durability combos are. Just know this is kind of unusable if people are bringing Stormbringers. Gromrill Plate is better than giving +1 damage, right? Because let's say you've got a 2/4 fighter. So with the +1 damage, it's 3/5. 3/5, the drop down to 2/4 is a smaller percentage than the drop down from 2/4 to 1/3, right? So Gromrill Plate would cancel out a +1/+1 buff, but it would be more powerful in a vacuum because when you're not attacking, it's a bigger debuff than the buff is a buff. However, they cancel each other out. Gromrill Plate against Stormbringer or against Gristlegrinder is just embarrassing, right? Because they're still getting +2/+2, which is just a massive a massive beatdown if you're trying to use Gromrill Plate and they're bringing Stormbringer. So in a really competitive group, don't bother, but it's incredible as far as the durability bonus that it gives you in any slightly more casual play group. Aether Quartz Ring, I think is really good. It's great on any foot slogging Titan, anything like, an Annihilator Prime where it just does an incredible amount of damage and then you've got the 2-inch reach. There's also, we'll see an order trait that it combos with really nicely. There's a lot of really interesting options that you can do with Aether Quartz Ring to make sure you're getting your kind of big guys into position in that first battle round, and then hopefully they're just fighting from then on out. You also have a couple dice boosts. Zintillion Stone and Tome of the Illuminate are both totally reasonable. Zintillion Stone, I think I mathed it out and it's 2.3 wild dice per game, so that's obviously better than just the 1. Now, of course, it's very variable. You could end up with 0 wild dice in some games, but on average, it's going to be more than just 1 extra wild dice, which is pretty great. Tome of the Illuminate, being able to save your wild dice is really good in some warbands and really crap in others. So, just be aware of what type of warband that you're in. If you have an ability that you're wanting to use a bunch of times, Tome of the Illuminate can be really good, but otherwise, most warbands are not going to get use out of it. But it's just there because at its best, it's really cool. Traits. Okay. Holy Might. +1 damage points to each hit and crit. Again, this is a much more reasonable, if you're wanting to do Stormbringer, but you just feel bad, you can absolutely just do Holy Might. Now, if you're an absurd evil human being, you could absolutely do Stormbringer plus Holy Might on a hero. Stormbringer is going to make it really easy for you to start stacking heroic traits, so then putting Holy Might on them as well is just, now you're on +4/+4 for every hit and crit. That's absurd. It's there if you want it. And it's very reasonable if you wanted Stormbringer but you feel bad about it. Just grab Holy Might and use a different one of the artifacts. Roaring Firebrand, really cool. It's an always-on AoE damage buff. +1 to crit damage for everybody within 6 inches of you. You don't have to use a dice for it. Really great in terms of how it combos with +1 attack buffs, because now you're giving +1 attack and the attacks are doing more damage. It's great with Skilled Commander because, whoever you're buffing with Skilled Commander is also getting a damage boost from it. Some of it can, remember that Skilled Commander kind of nombos with party buffs, like Roaring Firebrand combos with party buffs, combos with Skilled Commander. Those two things don't combo together, so you can't kind of build a big triangle that way. But it's still really good. Veteran Ranger, basically amazing on a high impact leader, amazing on any leader with Aether Quartz Ring. You're always on round 1. If you end up in reserve, hey, hello, I just set up where I would have been, but in round 1 instead of round 2. Incredibly powerful on any high impact leader, just makes them always be available. It's an amazing second trait. Once you've got your first hero trait, then you've got your artifact. Now you have this incredible board dominant piece. The only way you can really get messed over with that is if you're not coming on until round 2 and that's too late to be relevant and your opponent is able to play around it. Well, Veteran Ranger says, nope, too bad. As soon as I'm up in reserve after deployment, I just put them on within 3 inches of any of my deployment points. So I could put it with my other group. I could put it where it's going to come in anyway. You just have a ton of flexibility. It is incredible. It's the way in which, like, in AOS, pre-game moves are considered incredible. So even though they're not giving you extra damage anywhere, just the extra utility and the extra sort of ability to choose what's going on the board is just incredible, incredible amount of value there. Now I just want to do kind of the highlights of Rotten Ruin. You get sort of faction-specific stuff only for Rotmire or Hashut. This means that if you're playing Hashut and you've got an outside ally, that ally can get one of these warband-specific traits. But if you are let's say you're in Nurgle Demons and you bring in a Witherlord because that's kind of cool and flavorful, they won't be able to then bring in Rotmire artifacts. But it's really nice, I think, especially to have build options that aren't just kind of your takedown pinball, your pinball wizard stuff. That's kind of all you can do in Chaos. And so I think that this option is really cool. So starting with Rotmire Creed, just to go really quick, most of their artifacts are actually pretty bad. The one that's kind of good is Staff of the Rotmire. It's +1 move and +1 toughness, which is really nice for foot leaders, especially the Witherlord, because Witherlords do really respectable damage. But just like every bespoke foot leader, 20 health, 4 toughness, 4 move. Like, they're incredibly limited in terms of where they can impact the battlefield and how fragile they are once they get there. So if you are using both your moves to get to where you need to go, all of a sudden you're in a ton of trouble because you might not weather the storm until your next round when you can be impactful there. Kind of the same struggle that a lot of bespoke foot leaders have. Well, Staff of the Rotmire is great for that because +1 move means you might be able to get there in 1. +1 toughness means you'll be a lot more durable once you do get there. The Witherlord has 2-inch range, right? So now all of a sudden you're playing around with 7-inch threat range. This is just generally really valuable. Now the traits on Rotmire Creed are really solid, and if you have this warband, then you probably can already see the traits, but a bunch of them are good. Festerous Stench is good. Leech's Allergy is the funniest name and really good. Mucoid Wings, Master Alchemist, all of them are amazing. Master Alchemist especially because it boosts the really good triple that Witherlords have. That can be really solid. It just makes it more powerful, which it's already amazing, so you can just get a ton of damage out of it. Horns of Hashut are interesting. They have a pretty wide array of useful artifacts. Black Shard Armor is, again, great combo with Thick Skinned. Dark Forged Mace, really solid. It's the best damage boost on a Bloodkind, on a Plaguebringer, on a Wrathmaster. Yeah, not insane, but it's better than generic and other Chaos damage boosts. Basically, it's +1 strength and +1 damage for hits, but not crits. But for things that have a lot of attacks and say strength 4, that's really valuable because going from strength 4 to strength 5 is probably the most impactful jump right now because there's just a lot of toughness 4 fighters out there, a lot of toughness 5 fighters in people's warbands, even if it's not in terms of the full range of fighters. And being able to do more damage against them, like get more hits and then also do more damage on those hits, is a pretty big boost to your average damage per activation. They also have solid traits. Booming Voice, Skilled Weaponsmith, Powerful Brute, lots of good stuff there. The mid-battle initiative game really changes with Booming Voice. Booming Voice is the same as Skilled Commander, but it has no range limit, which is wild because a lot of the time in round 2, round 3 of Warcry games, you're in this situation where there's like 2 areas where there's if your opponent gets initiative, they're going to be able to save 1 fighter, force you to take one fight that you didn't want, or they're going to be able to take out one fighter, and the initiative basically can make a huge ripple effect on the battlefield. Here, if you have Booming Voice, you can throw everything into initiative because you know that you're going to be able to be the first mover in multiple fights across the board, which is really, really powerful because there's so many times when you win initiative and then you essentially have to choose two fights on the board. Which one am I going to win and which one am I probably going to lose? Booming Voice means you don't have to make that choice, which is amazing. Now let's get to the fun part. Now let's get to the combos. The first one I want to talk about is kind of a death trap Slaughter Priest. So let's say you do Ferocious Combatant, +1 attack on your Slaughter Priest. Slaughter Priests have this 3-4, 3-5 profile, so they're not rolling a lot of dice, but they have really respectable damage output. This is on the Axe version of the Slaughter Priest. And so they get a huge benefit from +1 attack just in terms of the percentage of their damage output. Getting one more 4-3-5 attack, that's going to be 3 damage a lot of the time, 5 damage some of the time, really good. Merciless Killer is a one-time bonus attack. So now your Slaughter Priest, of course, the classic thing of the Slaughter Priest combo is you Blood Boil them, you force them to come to you, and then you get like 1 attack in, but then they get to attack you unless you're out activating them. So you're actually kind of in a little bit of danger there, and it can be tough to use it effectively there. And you almost always have to combo your Slaughter Priest with a really big high impact fighter right next to them to then win the fight. Hopefully your Slaughter Priest survives, but then you win the fight afterwards because you've pulled them in. With this, you don't need that because you get Ferocious Combatant to really pump the Slaughter Priest damage, and then you get Merciless Killer, which gives you a one-time bonus attack. The one time is all you need from it, right? So all of a sudden, your Slaughter Priest can just pull anyone right over to them and just unleash an incredible amount of damage onto them, especially if you're starting the round in range. So now you have 3 attacks on them, all with +1 attack. This combo is insane. Now, it only works on Slaughter Priests because the other one that you could do it is a Great Bray Shaman. But those aren't quite as scary with Ferocious Combatant and Merciless Killer on them. Now, it's still reasonable. It makes your Great Bray Shaman into a kind of a legitimate fighter there. But it's not nearly as insane as it is with the Slaughter Priest. If you're in Khorne, try this out, man. I think it's going to be absolutely crazy. It makes it so like there's nowhere to hide from the Slaughter Priest, right? Because you can use your first move to get into a range of just about anything, right? Move 4, plus if you've got, you're using your wild dice to make sure that your Blood Boil is on a really high inch range, so you can have like 10-inch threat range with this ability, and then immediately be putting 2 boosted attacks onto it. That's, a huge amount of output onto whatever you're hitting, so just a really incredible combo there. Everlasting Party Buff is what I'm calling the next one. So if you have Thick Skinned and the Writhing Torque on a Claw Lord, an Arch Warlock, a Plague Priest, any of these sort of higher toughness, higher, I mean like toughness 4, instead of kind of the really weak toughness 3 ones where Thick Skinned isn't going to be enough to help them. But anytime you're making your Skaven much more durable and then putting the Writhing Torch on them, which makes their party buff really insane, right? So then they're always giving +3 attacks to everybody around them. That's really powerful, right? Because Lead from the Back, it's there and it's reasonable because Skaven leaders die really easily. So the fact that Lead from the Back is an absolutely overwhelming damage output, if it's on a 5 or a 6, is fair because you're usually only going to get it off once before your opponent kills your Skaven leader. This way, they're having a really tough time killing your Skaven leader. You're vomiting out an incredible amount of damage. Again, this is also for warbands where your leader isn't the only point of the warband, right? And now that they can't get rid of your Skaven leader just really easily or just in response to them popping the party buff, now all of a sudden you're just getting maximum output from it. +3 attacks in a cloud is really crazy and something your opponent is going to have nightmares about. This is especially good for like an ally Claw Lord where you can only stack one trait, one one artifact on your allies or on your regular heroes. So, but you only need these two here, and this is one trait and one artifact. This is perfect for bringing in an ally then, because you just don't have to worry about anything like that. And the reason I say Claw Lord is they're going to have an easier time getting a kill, which is what you need to get thick-skinned on an ally. But something like a Skaven Deathmaster is also going to be pretty reasonable with that. They're just a little bit more fragile, but they're still going to get this combo once you put thick-skinned on them, and they're still just going to be really difficult for your opponent to deal with. Just the amount of incredible utility that you create by having that cloud of extra damage. I also want to talk about Dancing Rhinos. Now, this is an all-universal trait. It just so happens that I think the best recipients for this universal combo are all in Chaos. So Amethyst Amulet, obviously that's the blink that gets you onto terrain, that makes you be immune to nets. Then you have Ferocious Combatant, +1 attack. I promise not every combo is going to be with Ferocious Combatant. It's just Chaos really wants it. You put that on a Skullmaster, a Juggerlord, or even something like a Doom Bull, right? So Skullmaster and Juggerlord, they have this 6-inch move, but they're just much easier to get away from than the other big cavalry units. But they have way better stats per per point than other cav, because they've only 6-inch move. They've got that mount keyword. They've got just a lot of mobility drawbacks. Once you put Amulet on them, they have no mobility drawbacks. All of a sudden, the 6-inch move, that's fast, right? When it's not on this sort of mount drawback, 6-inch move is considered really fast. They're going to be impossible to get away from. They're going to win all of their fights. They're just going to be able to dominate the board, being able to get wherever they want. And then, of course, Ferocious Combatant on Skullmasters and Juggerlords is really good. They don't just have the 2-4 damage output. They've got weightier attacks. They are going to really, really smash stuff, and nothing's going to be able to escape from them, and that's going to be great. I put the Doom Bull here as another one that people generally just give a really wide berth to. Now, Doom Bulls, again, 5-inch move. They are quick, but a lot of the time your opponent will be able to just kind of feed them chaff. You can't feed someone chaff when they have an Amethyst Amulet, because they don't have to waste a disengage to move 6 inches away. So if you feed your Doom Bull, if you feed your opponent's Doom Bull chaff and they have the Amulet, they just blink right past the chaff and get you anyway. With 2 attacks, again, Ferocious Combatant on Doom Bulls turns them into insane damage monsters. Yeah, all of these big dancing beasts in Chaos are just really, really good. This is a combo that can work for a lot of really scary fighters, but I really do think just all of the best homes for it are all in Chaos, and they are all really insane. And again, this is an easy one to pull off, right? Because Amethyst Amulet only takes 1 or 2 battles to get, and Ferocious Combatant is the start of game 1. So you can just have a Khorne Warband where your Juggerlord is your leader, or have a Beast of Chaos Warband where your Doom Bull is your leader, and then all of a sudden, 2 games into your campaign, you've got this incredible utility piece from it. Now you're going to be getting kills all over the place. You can start stacking traits onto your leader, and just you can snowball really quickly. Now there is going to be kind of a limit to that eventually, but you can get your full battle station operational just very, very quickly with this kind of combo. Last, I want to talk about the main thing that they're trying to get you to do with the Chaos items, which is these kind of kill trigger pinballs. And I think the best one is what I'm calling the Blitzbird. You could make a goat-themed name for it too. It's tough to say with the various goat birds of Tzeentch whether I want to do bird puns or goat puns. But Ferocious Combatant plus the 8-horned helm, which is a bonus move or a bonus attack on an Enlightened Aviarch with Disc, is really powerful. So basically, your buffed bird coming down, swooping in, 10-inch move, it kills something, then it gets to keep on swinging, or it gets to get out of dodge. Because one of the things that'll happen to you a lot with an Enlightened Aviarch on Disc is you'll drop down, you'll use the Guided by the Past thing, you'll just myrtleate something for 15 wounds, and then you're done and you're exposed, and your opponent's warband will collapse on your AV arc and eventually kill it, because they've gotten a lot more fragile in this edition than they were in first edition. However, being able to either get out of dodge or then turn and attack something else and take something else that would have hurt your AV arc really fixes the glass cannon issue and makes them way more durable without needing to stack more wounds on them or stack defensive items on them. You can have offensive items and still make them more durable, which is incredibly powerful. This also works really well on Varanguards too, or Slangor Slakehorn too. Anything that's fast, wants to just get in there, kill stuff, get out. The Varanguard, it's less about preserving its life the way it is for the Slakehorn or the AV Arc, and it's more about just like getting it zipping around the board, getting the most out of that incredibly expensive profile. There's a lot of build options for these takedown pinball leaders. I think that those three are probably, I think, the three best options, but you can do stuff on, some of the Nurgle Fly leaders too. Lots of build options for what you want to do after you get Ferocious Combatant and Eight-Horned Helm. As far as what traits you want to go from there. You have a lot of options, and I don't want to sort of give them to you right away here, because you really get to customize from that point. I've made all of these combos be a basic trait and just one other thing, either one trait or one artifact, because I want you to have something that you're going to be able to play really early in your campaign and kind of build your campaign around, and then later you can start stacking extra gubbins onto them. And that's when the Blitzbird type of combo becomes really good, is once you've got other stuff on there too, because you're once you have other traits, you can get even more out of this sort of kill bonus once you're having an easier time doing it. So just really powerful thing you can do in Chaos. I think that, these three options plus maybe the Nurgle Flies are probably the best options for sort of the builds for that. Now, death combos. There's kind of fewer of these because I didn't want to just put all of the make X insanely durable combos, because that's really a lot of what you're doing, is just making X leader completely unkillable. So just put that here for whatever your leader is. Put a unkillable X here along the combos, and you'll be perfectly fine. The first is kind of a Mortek Castle. So Mortisan Soul Masons with Resourceful plus Macabre Grimoire I think are really good. So the Soul Mason's party buff wants a constant supply of friendlies nearby, right? You want it to be in the middle of a big castle, kind of moving around, getting to the most important part on the board, and just basically winning the fight out of incredible attrition, right? Where you have this +1 attack, but then you've also got, these toughness 5 fighters all around you that are tough to put damage back onto, and you're just going to win that attrition battle over time. Resourceful makes sure that you have this party buff, plus you have your wild dice. Sort of stalkers want to have doubles every round to get their bonus moves, so having Resourceful on your Soul Mason is really good to have stalkers around. And then the Macabre Grimoire, because you want this sort of moving wall of Mortek Guard around to get these buffs, to have counter available at all times. Being able to resurrect the first one that goes down is just going to be incredibly punishing for your opponent, as far as like the attrition battle early on, and that tends to snowball later in the game. This is maybe less exciting from a like, oh wow, the output, but in terms of the fluff of death, especially of OCR Bone Reapers, of just being this oncoming, disciplined force, perfect lockstep army, Macabre Grimoire and Resourceful work really well with that, where you're just always using all the abilities available to your big lockstep army, and you're coming back from the first one that dies. Just an incredible kind of story that you can tell that way. So for the next one, I wanted to give a shout out to Justin Orton, who stumbled onto this one in his narrative games in the Nova Open. A Vampire Lord with Ferocious Combatant and the Thirsting Blade is just, it's unkillable while still being offensively boosted. And what I mean by that is, the Vamp Lord is really difficult to one-shot because it has toughness 5. So you'd have to just pour an incredible amount of crits onto it in just one round, which is basically impossible for most warbands to do. But it's really tough to keep alive long term because only 25 wounds, it still does kind of fall apart early on, and just the fact that it wants to be in the action, it it's statted like it wants to be in combat and it wants to get in there and fight. So when you add damage to it and you add life drain, that lets you keep it alive because, again, it's not being one-shot killed. You get to keep it alive while also keeping the output up, and that's incredibly powerful. If you just think about, the Thirsting Blade, it heals you equal to half the damage you've dealt, rounding up. So if you give Ferocious Combatant out there, now you have this incredible sort of high damage glass cannon, move 5, just get in there, fight, do as much damage as it can, but then vulnerable to reprisal, right? But the Thirsting Blade, healing it up every time means that your opponent's not really going to be able to remove it off the board easily, and you've just got this incredible damage piece that's in their face that they have to deal with. So the two of those together are much more powerful than just the pure output would tell you, because the amount of healing that the Thirsting Blade gives you is, it's going to be like 20 wounds over the course of the game, potentially, right? If you're just attacking every time. And remember, these Vampire Lords fly, so even though they're not that fast, they do move pretty quickly, and the flight makes it so that they get where they want to a lot faster than most fighters do. So this is another one where, just remember, most Warcry heals are really bad, so it's just easy to forget how inherently powerful healing is. Every point you heal is the same as a damage point that you could have done, right? Especially, damage points that your opponents are doing on your leader are some of the highest impact ones that they can do. And so to erase all those is just incredibly frustrating for your opponent. And it's, in one-on-one fights, those heals are the same. As long as you're not getting one-shot killed, in one-on-one fights, those heals are the same as boosting your damage output by 50%. And if there was an item that said, this fighter does 50% more damage, you would immediately go like, oh my god, I need that item on my fighter. That item might be a little bit better than the Thirsting Blade, but it would be the best item in the game. I mean, it's incredible, right? So, yeah, this is a very powerful combo that you can do on a few other fighters too. It's good on any toughness 5 combat model, or it's good on something like the Infernal Courtier, which just has a lot of wounds. So you're just dealing with this huge wound pool, and it has respectable damage, and it's, healing up every time. So that's just a wound pool that opponents are just going to get exhausted trying to deplete, and that just makes this an incredible combo. Terror Bat is what I'm calling a Vargulf Courtier. Now this is like the Infernal Courtier, but with a more furry face, and it having Resourceful plus Terrifying Visage. So Terrifying Visage might be the strongest trait in the game, I'm not sure, but Resourceful, Vargulf Courtiers do incredible damage as long as they have their triple available to them. Now triples, it's easy to guarantee them if you're willing to spend all your wild dice on them, but they drain your wild dice quickly, right? Because a lot of the time you're moving doubles into triples. A lot of the time you are, you're less able to do other things with your dice. Resourceful really helps with that. And then the Vargulf Courtier has that 2-inch range that's just so useful for Terrifying Visage. So this way you get to lock them down, and you get to use the self-buff triple to just absolutely pour damage on them with no reprisal. Especially because the Courtier has that 8-inch move flight. So you can, and you have lots of really cheap fighters in every Death Warband. So you're probably going to be winning the activation war. You're going to be able to fly up to something that's already moved, put your first big triple damage onto it, come around. You've got Resourceful, so you had one more wild dice at the beginning. You might have you can use Resourceful to be sort of a benefit to the potential of winning your why am I blanking on initiative? Winning the initiative, and then Terrifying Visage, when you win the initiative, just they don't activate. So You've already poured your triple damage onto them. Then you Terrifying Visage them. You pour the triple damage again. Even if they don't, even if you don't kill them there, they can't fight you again. And so it's one of the only ways for Death to deal with the Order and Destruction combos that are absurd. And remember, it's Death doesn't have nets. So this is the only way to get a net in Death, and it's one of the best nets in the game because it just completely makes them not activate. So they don't even get to sort of dodge it with Amethyst Amulet or something like that. So this also can work on a White King on Steed. You'd probably want Ferocious Combatant instead of Resourceful because their damage comes from their attacks. They don't have a big ability buff that sort of helps them there. So you want to give them extra attacks to kind of put their damage on par with a Varghulf Courtier. But it's still kind of the same principle. A fast fighter in a warband that can win the activation war, that can then just zoom in, attack, Terrifying Visage, lock them down, attack again. If they survive, they still can't attack you back, and then maybe you get to attack them again. Just an absolute kind of utility overwhelming situation for Death there. Yeah, and just one of the only ways in the game to deal with some of the absurd combos that I'm about to give you right now. So we're going to go with order. I'm going to start with some of the more casual, friendly, cool combos that are in the game. I'm going to start with the one that I'm working towards in... I actually just got it, but I haven't played with it yet in my campaign, which is what I'm calling the Sniper Knight. It's a Knight Arcanum with Resourceful and Serpent Tongue Scepter. Now, the Knight Arcanum is known for having maybe the best wizard burn spell in the game, and it's also got a regular shooting attack that's more just on average par with the wizards. And so you can absolutely decimate the closest deployment group anytime you start on board, because you have the 4-inch move to get to them, then you can shoot, then you use your ability, your burn spell, then you use Serpent Tongue Scepter. So the burn spell, the EV is 4.5. Your shot, EV is a little more than 3, but the modal outcome is 3. That's the outcome that happens the most often. That's 3. Then Serpent Tongue Scepter, that's 2d6, so on average that's 7, plus however many d3s are around. So you're going to throw sort of 16 damage, 18 damage, all spread around this deployment group, and just like absolutely devastate them and knock stuff out of the game before it can even really start. And that's incredibly powerful, especially against swarm warbands where you might be able to get 2 kills out of this, plus weaken some other fighters. Just really cool stuff for your Sniper Knight to just have one big artillery session early in the game. Also, if you start with no deployment groups in range of this, you can just wait until there's a big team fight. Most Warcry games have a big team fight, and then you can absolutely do it. And then, your fellow Stormcast are going to be able to, survive the D3 damage that they take when you're also just blowing up your opponent. The reason I think Resourceful is good with it is, it's on the ability, the burn spell is only on a double, but Knight Arcanums are in Thunderstrike, and Thunderstrike is home to Annihilators, which are really powerful, but they don't have any kind of movement boosts, right? They don't have the free movement that Warrior Chamber gets. So they really need, when I was playing with them, I found they really need to have Rush active at all times. So Resourceful is just another Rush to have, and just really helps your Annihilators get into position. And so, the Resourceful on the Arcanum is really just because of the warbands that it's going to be in, and then the Serpent Tongue Scepter is there. By the way, if you just Google Dominion Pro Painters, I think you'll get to this Warhammer community article with probably the best painted Stormcast I've ever seen. I know a lot of people are into their kind of non-metallic metal crazy Stormcasts. I know those are what win painting competitions, but in my opinion, this is the best painted Stormcast I've ever seen. It's just wild. All right, so the next combo is a base boost for the Spirit Song. This is kind of a similar idea as to the Chaos combo around Skaven. But if you have an Arch Revenant, which are the ones that boost the Spirit Song in Sylvaneth, and you give it Thick Skinned and Roaring Firebrand, that's sort of another thing that could be kind of musical, right? You're just like, it's a heavy metal Arch Revenant or something, you know, really making the Spirit Song intense. Maybe it's an EDM Arch Revenant. The +1 attack buff that the Arch Revenant has, it boosts the aura from Roaring Firebrand. Again, they improve geometrically. You get +1 attack, and that attack is more powerful than it otherwise would be. Thick Skinned keeps your Arch Revenant around. Now, this one is 2 traits, so you're going to have to play KG to kind of earn Firebrand, right? You're going to, because you'll have an Arch Rev with Thick Skinned on it. They have respectable damage output, but it's not overwhelming, so you're going to have to pick your spots. But luckily, you know, Sylvaneth has other high damage things, so maybe you can weaken an enemy hero and then pop down with the Arch Revenant and finish it off. You're just going to have to really plan for it and be smart about how you do it. That said, you know, really incredible damage buff. It's also really useful for an ally Arch Revenant to come in with this, with trying to get Roaring Firebrand. Oh, no, it's not, because you need 2 traits there. So it does need to be your leader. But it's like a really powerful party buff, sort of double enhancement that's really insane in order. You can kind of do this with Daughters of Cain, with Fire Slayers, with Ideneth Deepkin as well. All of those factions have access to a similar thing, and it's going to be really powerful. Now let's get to some of the crazy ones. Before that, though, let's talk about Iron Maiden, is what I'm calling this one. It's a Bloodrack Medusa with Thick Skinned plus Gromril Plate. I talked before about how those 2 combo to make something completely unkillable. So they're really good on things that your opponent is desperate to take down. And the Bloodrack Medusa, I think, is the epitome of that in the Grand Alliance. Bloodrack Medusas have that 88% success rate net and the 2-inch range. So that's a whole combo that I just talked about trying to build via narrative. The Bloodrack Medusa just comes with it in order. And so then making a Bloodrack Medusa unkillable is just an absolute nightmare for an opponent who, you know, they go in, they have 7-inch move, they lock something down, they hit it at 2 inches, and your opponent just has to get this Medusa off of the board. They're sort of incentivized to throw everything they have at it. Well, now that you have Thick Skinned and Gromril Plate, that's not going to work, right? So you're just going to put whatever their most important piece is into the spin cycle. There's nothing they're going to be able to do to take your Bloodrack Medusa off of the board. It's just going to be like just this incredible control piece for any fighter. And then, you know, the rest of Daughters of Cain, generally pretty high damage stuff, like if you have Sisters of Slaughter, stuff like that. So having they're very glass cannon, I guess is what I would say. And so having this unkillable sort of bastion in the center of your glass cannon warband, I think is going to be really powerful and just a really great control piece to have, to give you kind of this tempo play style in your Daughters of Cain. Next is Protector Prime. I said, you shall not pass. So this is the Gandalf of combos. Basically, Protector Primes with Ferocious Combatant pour out a ton of damage. They already are incredibly durable because they've got that toughness 6, that 25 wounds on toughness 6, but they're really painfully slow, especially in the first round, because the Warrior Chamber bonus move action is when there's a wounded fighter nearby, and you're not going to have any wounded fighters early on. That's where the Aether Quartz ring comes in, is to give you +2 move. All of a sudden you're move 5 early on. You get to the most important part of the board right away, and then your 3-inch range just creates this massive no-go zone, especially with Ferocious Combatant threatening to just throw absurd amounts of damage everywhere you want. You just get to establish this pie plate of influence right from the very first battle round. And then, you know, later on in your campaign, Protector Primes have no problem getting kills, so you can get Veteran Ranger. And and then just be able to, no matter what, every single game, establish this pie plate of the board belongs to me. My Protector Prime is going to win every fight here. I'm just going to stick it here, and there's nothing you can do about it because the Aether Quartz Ring and Veteran Ranger with Ferocious Combatant are just going to get me there, get me damage, make sure I win these fights. Any fighter that isn't like a really tricked up leader that enters this massive sphere is just dead. It's dead. There's nothing else to talk about. And that's just a really powerful thing to be able to do in Warcry. You know, with how terrain is, with how a lot of the missions are, with objectives, stuff like that. Just a really amazing combo there. All right, so now we get to the first Stormbringer combo. I'm calling this Shiva, Destroyer of Worlds, because that's what it is. An Achelian King or an Evocator Prime on Dracoline, not the regular one. I mean, the regular one too, but the really scary stuff is Evo Prime on Dracoline. You get Ferocious Combatant for +1 attack, and then you get Stormbringer for +3 damage. Look at these damage tables, right? I talk about how anyone who deals more than 8 damage to toughness 3 is an awesome hammer piece. We've got almost triple that, right? With the Sword King or the Sword Thunder Prime. We're putting out absurd amounts. We're even putting out huge damage to toughness 6 fighters. 10 damage on a toughness 6 fighter. Those fighters are not, right? Like, I just talked about a Protector Prime being essentially unkillable at toughness 6 with 25 wounds. These will chew through that at a reasonable pace, right? Doing 13 damage, doing 11 damage to them. You know, these Spear and Grand Stave ones, they've got the 2-inch range, so having a little bit less damage is fine there, right? Being able to move 10 inches and then put this absurd damage output on there is without even using Onslaught. This is just their regular attacks with a combo of Ferocious Combatant and Stormbringer that you could have by the 3rd game. Daughters of Cain leaders are also a really solid proxy for this for cheaper. But things get crazy when you add abilities. So I just want to show Achelian King using Storm of Blows. Now, this is already known. I'm needing to stress this because these numbers are just funny money. Regular Achelian Kings with Storm of Blows are considered one of the scariest hammers in the game already with DPA 4 of 12, right? On average, a Spear Achelian King will put 12.83 damage onto a Toughness 4 fighter in one attack. A Sword King will put 12 damage. The Sword King, you know, being a little bit less on Toughness 4, but on Toughness 6, it evens out to being higher. The Spear King being still 8 damage onto Toughness 6. There's just not a lot of things that can put that kind of damage onto things that are that tough. Really incredible hammer piece, just with base stats. When you have Ferocious Combatant and Stormbringer, we are talking about more than 30 damage on average. Okay? That is the average roll for a Spear Achelian King being 30.67 damage. That is absurd. A Sword Achelian King is putting 19.5 damage on average against Toughness 6. Okay? Your chances of one-shot killing a Protector, right? One of the tankiest fighters in the entire game, an Annihilator, tankiest fighters in the entire game, one-shot killing them at like a very reasonably high percentage at 10-inch move, right? Nothing can escape. Nothing can avoid just being completely shot off the board by this, by like the 3rd battle of the game, of your campaign, right? Because, again, this is Ferocious Combatant is a item that you use right away. Stormbringer takes 3 to 5 battles to get to. Oftentimes, if you're really kind of min-maxing for it, you can get it in 3. The damage output is, you know, so much more than what normal Warcry numbers look like that it's hard to just put this number on here and communicate how ridiculous it's going to feel in game, right? That an average damage output of 30 on toughness 4 fighters is just completely absurd. Um, and the fact that you can pair it with these 10-inch move flyers with, of course, Thunder Primes aren't quite as scary because they don't have Storm of Blows, but they're still, for these damage table numbers are without using Onslaught, right? So you still get to have a significant boost past this, where you'll often be doing 5 more damage than what's on these tables. Sometimes, 9 more damage than what's on these tables, right? Depending on what your bonus from that onslaught ends up being. So the damage that you get and the flexibility of where to put that damage in order is just absolutely absurd. And again, like I said, dock leaders can do this pretty well for a lot cheaper. The sort of prosecutor leaders can do this for cheaper. The Knight Azeros can do this for cheaper, right? You can get pretty good proxies of these that are still just blowing away any sense that we've had of what it means to be a hammer in Warcry. These numbers, these output numbers are just blowing that away. And that's only with 2 pieces, right? It's not like, say, the Blitzbird from Chaos, where that's an incredible combo. But it takes, like, you really need to start stacking more stuff onto it before it gets really, really broken. This is broken immediately. And we've been talking a lot in Warcry about how the importance of having, heavy hitters that kill chaff efficiently, but then also heavy hitters that duel other heavy hitters really well. That second option is becoming much more important than it was in 1.0. This is an absurd. Your ability to just one-shot kill leaders from 11 inches away is just really, really consistent once you get, again, this combo that does not take a long time to put together. I really think you should avoid using this in your narrative games. I don't think it's going to be an enjoyable time for... it definitely won't be an enjoyable time for your opponents, and I think by the second time you pull this off, I think it won't be an enjoyable time for you either. I think this is just like a really bad faith combo to put together. I think it's really weird that they put this in the book, but it gets crazier. So let's go to destruction. So first, some really friendly, cool combos that you can put together that are really powerful still. So a Thunder Fist with Skilled Commander and Dead Sneaky, I think is pretty cool. Again, Thunder Fists were hugely nerfed. You can do this with a Cruel Boys fighter too, but basically Dead Sneaky, the Thunder Fist being 10-inch range, Dead Sneaky being a free move if you're outside of 12. It makes it really, really difficult to stay out of a Thunder Fist's threat range. Because they can always just move and then get 2 shots on something, which is just really powerful for them. Then that, they aren't as good at 1-shot killing stuff as they were before, but now 2 shots is usually going to do it. And, then you can do Might Makes Right to shoot something else too. Inspiring Presence is just generally excellent on ogres because every ogre is really high impact. So when you're inspiring presencing things, you just like really cripple your opponent's responsibility just right away. And so the Dead Sneaky movement lets you move 4 inches to get within Inspiring Presence range of other ogres to get them into position. Just generally really solid utility here to play around with your Thunder Fist and just make sure that it's always able to affect the game. The next one I'm calling the Fungal Freeze boss. I think the Loon boss on Cave Squig is probably the best way to take advantage of Dynasty Shiv. I'm really fascinated by this artifact. So I'd start with Thick Skinned just to keep it alive. And then, because you're going to be jumping into combats trying to freeze your opponents. But the Loon boss is fast enough that it can move in, get within 2-inch reach of multiple things, and then try those Nasty Shiv fights. Being able to kind of freeze one thing, attack another thing, I think can be really good in some of these team fights, and I'm really excited to see how it works. Thick Skinned is going to let you keep your boss alive to kind of get more of these attacks out, right? Because in the first round that you do this, it's probably not going to work the first time, right? It's going to work over the course of extended fights. So you want your loon boss to be in these extended fights, and then you're just going to trip your opponent up, and you're eventually going to win the fights by just having Dynasty Shiv there. So really interested. I hope someone tries this out and lets me know how it goes. I'm really interested to see the effectiveness of this, and just as far as making tricksy control pieces within the Big Smash Grand Alliance, I think is just really, really a playstyle that's been needed for a long time, and something that they're potentially giving us here. All right, now we get to Destruction's response to the absurd Achillean King and Thunder Prime and Gorgai combos that Order can pull off. Starting the first one off, calling it Avalanche of Pain. This is a Mega Boss or a Tyrant with Unstoppable Rampager and Agile Warrior. So, Agile Warrior is +1 move, right? A Mega Boss is only 3-inch move. I probably wouldn't do it on a Tyrant. I'd probably do Ferocious Combatant on a Tyrant because they have 4-inch move. But basically, Ogres and Ironjaws can both boost their threat range on a double. So the Mega Boss has Charge, and the Tyrant has On the Maw Path, which gives +3 move to 1 movement. So it's basically makes it 7-inch move once, and then it gets to attack. So these fighters are often, when they get into combat, they're going to have just moved, because it's really easy for your opponent to kind of get out of their range and not let them really double attack much in later rounds. And they kill everything they touch anyway, so you're usually just moving on to a new fighter. So then, you get them these abilities to get more attacks. And then Unstoppable Rampager just boosts their damage into the stratosphere, right? A Mega Boss with Unstoppable Rampage and Ferocious Combatant is putting out 20 damage on T5. A Tyrant or a Gut Lord is doing even more. And remember, this is toughness 5 that you're doing this to. You are, again, one-shot killing Stormcasts. It can get even more ridiculous. Like if you didn't need to use Charge to get into the fight, you can put a Onslaught onto your Mega Boss and be one-shot killing some of the biggest things in the game. Charge lets you often be in a position to attack twice, right? Especially if you're within. Now, let's say this is instead of Ferocious Combatant, right? Because we're just saying it's more realistic if you have Agile Warrior. So now your Mega Boss is moving 4 inches. It gets, this extra move, this 4-inch move from Agile Warrior, attacks twice against a toughness 5 opponent. You're doing 16.7 damage twice, and for a total average damage of 13.33. Again, with the Order combos, I had to say this is funny money. This is not like anything else that exists in Warcry. Our sense of what a hammer piece is doing is just nowhere near around this kind of damage. And so your Mega Bosses are just going to be absurd. Your Tyrants are putting out absurd damage. And again, this is, Tyrants with 7-inch threat range if they're using Ferocious Combatant. 8-inch threat range, because it's 7 inches of move and then 1-inch movement. Gut Lords have that 2-inch range, I think. They are putting out 25 damage against toughness 5. That's, again, completely absurd. Gut Lords, if anything, are probably the best point-for-point output on this. It's completely absurd. And it's not even the scariest damage combo that Destruction can do. Because even scarier than that is what you can do with a Skalg, or with a Gnashtooth Killaboss, or with a Gruntaboss, by having Ferocious Combatant and Gristle Grinder. The reason I think these are even scarier is because they start with this unkillable 8-inch move platform, right? The Mega Boss and the Tyrant have to get, they have to use dice to get that 8-inch threat range. These do not. So then this damage output is without having used Onslaught once they get there, right? Without Onslaught, the Gnashtooth Killaboss is doing 26 damage to toughness 3, 20 damage to toughness 4. This is before Onslaught, which will boost it even more. 14 damage to toughness 6. You can do even more with Onslaught. This is, toughness 6 fighters are not supposed to be taking this kind of pain, right? And the fact that you can do it is absurd. The fact that you can one-shot kill any bespoke leader is absurd. The Skalgs can do it, the Grunta bosses can do it, the Gnashtooth Killaboss can do it. I wanted to shout out the Squig Hopper boss because it's only 255 points for an absurd damage output, 17 DPA 4. Again, without using any abilities, just walking over there, attacking, having 11-inch threat range to put 17 damage wherever you want before you've even used Onslaught. It's just ridiculous. Again, at least with Avalanche of Pain, you can kind of play around it by feeding chaff models to the Mega Boss or the Tyrant. Really hard to do that against the cavalry that can kind of hang in the back there, and then gets this crazy output even if there's a chaff model nearby. Especially these Squig Hopper bosses that have the flight keyword, so they can just fly over, the first wave of fighters. Just insane output, so far beyond anything that's in Warcry. This is, again, something I would not suggest you do unless your opponents are on really, really heavy competitive warbands. But again, like I said before, Destruction has a lot of cool, more casual options there. When we got through the Destruction sort of things, lots of really fun stuff you could do with all of their items. I would just caution people, Gristle Grinder and Stormbringer, I think, are huge mistakes. I think you're not going to have fun if any of the players in your narrative campaign end up taking those two items. I don't think you're going to have much fun. But the reason I put this video together, I don't want people overreacting. I know I was sort of being hyperbolic because it really is hyperbolic damage numbers. I'm being hyperbolic here about what these two items do. The rest of the narrative items, as I showed before, there's tons of really awesome, really fun combos that you can put together in narrative to have really wild stuff happen. And that can, create a ton of different play styles. There were multiple different control elements that you can do if that's what you're into. There's a lot of kind of team fight combos that you can do if that's what you're into. There's a lot of really crazy leader combos that you can do, even if you decide to avoid the really busted stuff. Because, again, remember, Unstoppable Rampager plus Agile Warrior or Ferocious Combatant plus Gristle Grinder, these are things that only take 2 pieces to put together, right? So then you get to stack more stuff onto this and make the damage numbers even more ridiculous. But there's other fun things you can do. Hopefully some of the other combos were sort of really interesting to you. Some of the other items I showed hopefully are really interesting. Really excited for people to try out some of these narrative games and get some of this cool stuff into their play groups. I just wanted to really throw out the caution flag for some of the more ridiculous stuff. And hey, if you've got a really competitive play group that wants to do narrative, try it out. See if see if you can put together a Grunta boss with these crazy combos in a really solid Ironjawz warband, and then see if your opponents can manage to do anything at all about it. I think you'll probably have a lot of fun trying it out that way. So I'm going to go back into more matched play stuff for my next few videos, but until then, may all your rolls be crits.